Hey, this is Mr. Spencer. We're talking about the characterization in The Great Gatsby today. In your Great Gatsby folder, you will see a link that says S.T.E.A.L characterization chart. You should have done something similar with me when we read The Crucible. And the best way to use this is to either write down your own notes in your notebook, write them in your book, or you could print this off. Okay, there's lots of places you could take notes, but I encourage you to press this download button, and then that'll give you a chance to download it and open it up. Okay, I did one here though, and I went through some of the notes. Okay, S.T.E.A.L, an easy way for you as an English student to keep track of any character in a book you're reading, but noting how the author characterizes through direct and indirect characterization. So direct characterization is when the author tells you how the person looks or the actions or behavior that the person performs. Those are direct characterization ideas. But there are other indirect ways we can draw conclusions about a character, such as noticing patterns in their speech, what or how they talk, thoughts, what kind of thought patterns or thoughts do they have about themselves or the world, and the most interesting one, but the hardest to get a handle on, is implicit characterization for E, effect. What effect on others does the character have? Other people feel how about this person? Okay, so I've gone through the different characters here, and I'm trying to just come up with at least 3 categories of notes. Okay, I probably can't come up with every single category for each character, but I'll read through what I've done so far. Okay, now this is considering that you've read through chapters 4 and 5 already, all right? So no spoilers, but Nick Carraway, he's the narrator of the book, if you want to write that down. I've noticed Nick, he seems to choose his words carefully. He appears quite disarming, in my opinion. That means people seem to confide in Nick, and he says that on page 1, that people seem to want to tell him things, share secret confidences with him. Will that get him into trouble? Are you someone like that people seem to want to tell their secrets to and confess things to? Actions for Nick, I've noticed, is he tries not to overly judge people. And I know he's got some vague banking or investment job, like he's studying on banking and securities, like he wants to get into Wall Street. He works in some sort of office, but it's unclear exactly what his job is. Nick doesn't spend much time describing his work. He seems more interested in Gatsby and the drama surrounding that. If you come up with anything else, jot this down. Again, you can print this off, or you could just write it down in your notebook or jot it down in your book, maybe on the inside book cover. For Tom Buchanan, on page 8, he's described as having a gruff, husky tenor voice, and he has this effect of an impression of fractiousness. I think that's a key idea in the era of modernism, and Tom seems to make people feel fractured or broken. Pulling people apart, Tom. His actions, well, he's cheating on his wife Daisy, we've learned by chapter 2, and he breaks his mistress Myrtle's nose on page 37. Bam! His look is described on page 7 as a sturdy, straw-haired man of 30. So he's 30 years old, and he must be sort of blondish, dirty blonde, straw-haired. And he's also described on page 7 as having a hard mouth, powerful body, and being muscular. Okay, pause the video if you want to jot down any of these notes. Nick, Tom. Now we also meet on page 8, 9, 10, Jordan Baker and Daisy Buchanan. Jordan is described as careless later on in the end of chapter 3, page 58. She makes others feel privileged or secretive, I feel like. There's something privileged, almost smug about her. She's a professional golfer, Jordan, and she's alleged to have cheated at golf. Sometimes you'll hear Nick just call her Miss Baker. So if you see Miss Baker, that is Jordan. And on page 57, Nick remembers this thing where in a magazine or a newspaper, somebody wrote about Jordan moving the golf ball on the putting green during a professional golf match. She's described as being slender, smaller in some areas on page 11. Nick objectifies her. And she's described several times as having gray, sun-strained eyes. It reminds me of the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg in that billboard on page 23. She has an erect posture and she sits up super straight, chin up in the air, a little smug, maybe condescending. Daisy is Tom's wife. She has a baby with her husband, Tom. Daisy's voice on page 9 is described as low and thrilling, a deep, low voice, but it's thrilling to her cousin, Nick. She's also described as having a laugh on page 8 that is absurd and charming little laugh. I think she makes others feel uncivilized, as Nick comments on page 12. Nick might have been joking here, but I think that's an interesting comment. And she apparently, we learn, met Jay Gatsby when she was 18 while she was growing up in Louisville, Kentucky. She had a brief fling with him. Okay, Jordan describes that all at the end of chapter 4. Pause the video if you want to take down any of these notes on Jordan or Daisy. They're also friends, Jordan and Daisy. Jordan tells the story. She knew Daisy back in Louisville, Kentucky when she met Gatsby, who was a lieutenant in the American Army at the time. All right, on the next part, we've got character. We don't learn much about Gatsby till chapter 3. He has an elaborate formality of speech, and Nick describes it just missed being absurd on page 48. He says old sport a lot, and he has an aura of mystery, but it provokes a lot of rumor mongering. He has a magical and charismatic smile that's described on page 48, and he claims on page 65 his parents died and he got a lot of money. Does that mean he inherited money? I'm not sure about that story. In chapter 4, Gatsby describes to Nick while he's driving. He is stupid rich, though. His house is huge. Myrtle Wilson in chapter 2 has a lower class speaking tone, a lower class inflection when she talks. She's Tom's mistress. She's married to the mechanic George, we'll see down below, and she is in her mid-30s, described as curvy. Her flesh is surplus, moves sensuously, Nick describes curiously on page 25. She is a thick-ish figure with one C, and she's faintly stout. Is that kind of like thick or fat? And she's described as her nerves were continually smoldering, which is often a word describing something hot. Is she hot? Myrtle, the mistress of Tom. Pause the video if you want to check out anything further for Gatsby or Myrtle Wilson. And then George Wilson, we don't know too much about him, but we meet him in chapter 2. He's a mechanic. He lives in the Valley of Ashes. His wife is Myrtle, but he seems unaware of the affair with Tom. He's dirty, greasy, blonde, and spiritless. It's described on page 25. He has light blue eyes, and a damp gleam of hope comes into his eyes when he sees Tom in chapter 2, maybe because Tom's going to sell him a car. He's trying to make more money, but George seems very lower class compared to Tom's upper class wealth. And then Meyer Wolfsheim we meet in chapter 4, thick European accent. He is implied to be in some sort of, mafia gang. He knows Gatsby intimately. I guess he goes back with Gatsby, but also we learn he rigged or fixed the 1919 Major League Baseball World Series with the Chicago Black Sox. There is a history of gambling and mafia activity in Chicago, Illinois, definitely, not just New York City. So the Chicago Black Sox in Chicago, that's a real story, but is Wolfsheim real? You might Google the name Arthur Rothschild and maybe find out more about Meyer Wolfsheim in real life. He's described as a small, flat-nosed Jewish man on page 69. He has tiny eyes, and we learn on page 72 he shows Nick cufflinks on his suit made of human molars, which are human teeth. Very strange Meyer Wolfsheim. That's the end of the video. S.T.E.A.L characterization chart. If you can fill in any other blanks, that'd be great, and they might help you on a future reading quiz. Try to get at least 3 of these categories noted for each character. S.T.E.A.L characterization. This is Mr. Spencer, signing off.